Hello loyal followers. A couple of weeks ago, in the sweltering July heat of suburban London, I had a lengthy conversation with Dan Marshall. Dan's an independent game developer who was the driving force behind the creation of The Swindle, a 2D stealth game which featured in a Stealth Game Changes episode back in March. You probably saw it? If you've been following me on Twitter or supporting my work on Patreon, you'll already know what this video is the beginning of, but for the benefit of everyone else, I'm just going to take a moment to explain. So, I've made over a dozen videos looking at this peculiar niche of the video game world we call stealth games. Hopefully you found some of what I had to say interesting or valuable, even if you didn't always agree with me on some of the more opinionated topics. Or even if I occasionally got my facts wrong. It's a process. This whole project is an ongoing exploratory process, and I'm keen to make more videos featuring not just my own knowledge, research and analyses, but also the hard-won experiences of people who have actually been involved in building the stealth games we enjoy. It makes perfect sense to me that my audience would find it interesting to hear from actual stealth game developers who all have their own takes on the various nuances of what makes a good stealth gaming experience and can shed light on how they went about building their own. And that's basically what this video is kicking off. In this series, I'll be talking to developers who were directly involved in the games I've featured before on the Stealth Docs channel. And Dan Marshall has very graciously volunteered to be the first. Hopefully he won't regret that. With all of this in mind, let's start with some history. Dan's been making independent games since the mid-2000s, and his back catalogue of projects covers an impressive range of genres. He's developed a puzzle game, Cruxade, which is a weird blend of Tetris and colour shape matching mechanisms, and he also worked on a 1v1 2D deathmatch shooter, Gibbage. Among his most notable and well-received projects are the foul-mouthed point-and-click adventure games Ben There, Dan That, and Time Gentlemen Please. Those built up quite the cult following. If you're into that genre and you decide to play them, I'm sure you'll work out why. Dan also won a BAFTA for his work on Privates, a twin-stick shooter game commissioned by Channel 4, which is a media company here in the UK, to teach secondary school children about sex, STDs, and various other surreal things about the human body you never thought you wanted to know. Dan released another 1v1 deathmatch shooter, Gun Monkeys, which I think is fair to describe as a refined, tidier, and all-around better version of his earlier game, Gibbage. And then he decided to make a stealth game, The Swindle, which is the topic of our conversation today. We talk about how Dan went about designing The Swindle, how it evolved into the game it is now. We also discuss his aversion to quite a lot of what modern stealth games have had to offer, and how this impacted his own decisions as a developer who wanted to make something interesting. A few of you got in touch via Patreon and Twitter with questions of your own for Dan, and I managed to ask him all of them, so thank you for those. I won't spoil the details ahead, but I have no doubt a few of you will be vocal on your disagreement with Dan on certain topics, and that's fine. I want more people to get involved in the conversation about stealth games, as long as we're all prepared to show each other basic levels of courtesy. Shouldn't be too hard for YouTube. Probably. One last thing I want to do is to thank the kind people who sponsor my work on Patreon. It really does humble me that you're prepared to throw $1 or even several dollars in my direction. Special thanks go out to the sneaky sponsors, whose names are on the screen now. Seeing as this video is over an hour long, I wanted to make sure everyone supporting this odd little channel got their well-deserved praise at the beginning. If you enjoy the content I make and you're inclined to buy me a cup of coffee, maybe even something a little stronger, you can head over to my Patreon page. They accept PayPal, it's a trusted medium to support small creators like me, and it's very easy to understand my work process. I only take pledges when I upload a Stealth Docs episode, so you can rest assured it's never a case of giving something for nothing, and as you've probably gathered, I keep everyone updated with the latest projects I'm working on. You'll find direct links to my Patreon page in the description if you want to take a gander at that, peruse some details. But now, without further delay, I present you with today's stealth game developer, Dan Marshall. Thank you for making time for this. This is kind of a new thing that I'm diving into for the channel and trying to get more people involved and actual people who work on these things rather than just me who plays them and talks about them. Because obviously you can only say so much before you need to talk to the people who actually build the things about what their experiences are and what they dealt with.
I think it's a really good idea because, like, you do see stuff where it's just like it's all speculation. And you just go, well, that's not true. And people just taking guesswork or just pot shots at the concepts and the design of stuff because there's so much of this stuff online now.
Absolutely. It's all gone a bit mad.
You could have emailed me. I'm not a hard man to get in touch with, and I could have confirmed that's not true for you. But there you go.
That's actually a good starting point, I think. As a general, there's a general perception of what indie developers have to go through. Because obviously the term became popularized with Indie Game the movie, and then people saw these three very different development experiences, and they thought, well, naturally, it must be one of those three things people go through. When in fact, talking to people, it seems like it can be a range of experiences and a range of things. But what's your experience been like as an indie developer? Because your back catalogue is quite varied, I want to say.
It is, yeah. The thing is, I look at guys like, because I cut my teeth doing adventure games, like point-and-click adventure games, and bless him, Dave Gilbert, who's a sort of friend of mine, he's an acquaintance, I've met him several times, he's a lovely bloke, but he started making Blackwell games around about the same time that I did Been There, Done That, and Time Gentlemen Please, so we sort of fell into sort of chatting to each other quite early on in the indie scene, and he's still making adventure games, and I would have gone potty by now if I was still making point-and-click adventure games. Do you know what I mean? I like full credit to him for sticking with it, but I don't have that brain. I sort of go, I've made an action game, now I'll make an adventure game, then I'll make a stealth game, then I'll make a football game, a multiplayer game, whatever, and just and try my hand at all these little, because it's not like, when I play games, I don't only play platformers. Do you know what I mean? I don't only play point-and-click games. I play RPGs, I play action games, I play simulation games. So it's not like I have this one core thread running through me. I've got to only make adventure games. That's where my heart and soul is at. I like all kinds of games. I love every kind of stuff. So it doesn't really make sense to me to root myself in that way where I'm just making one kind of thing. But as far as the process is concerned, it's interesting you bring up Indie Game the movie, which was a long time since I saw it, so I might be wrong about this, but I remember that film being very sort of, here's a bunch of people who have thrown their all into this, and they've, if this doesn't work, then, which is, all right, documentary filmmaking, it's going to be pretty boring if they've all got a safety net, but they're all like, oh my god, if this fails, then I'm going to be living on the streets, and I'm doomed, and all the rest of it. And my experience, I made my first indie game before, I made my first indie game when people sort of balked at the idea of downloading video games. Everyone wanted a game that it had to come in a box, or they were upset by the concept of it. This was like sort of just about Steam, but pre-Steam sort of era. No, just post-Steam, but it was this really weird time where people would only buy games that had a physical box. So it was like selling copies was like getting blood from a stone. So my process was very much, I had a full-time job and I was making games on the side, and if the game only brought in 200 quid or nothing or 10 grand or whatever, brilliant. But if it didn't, it didn't mean I wasn't going to be able to make rent that month.
No,
I wasn't going to be able to eat. I was never eating, beans out of a can because my video game development career was too important to me. I was much more sensible about it than that. I had, before I went full-time indie, I had a firm grasp on one branch before I let go of it. So that film was kind of weird to me. I didn't identify with it quite a lot because I was much more boring and sensible. And all that.
Yeah, I totally get where you're coming from because that risk, similarly to me, is totally anathema. I mean, this, for example, is something I'm just doing kind of for fun, but also because, I feel like there's a lot of things to be said about stealth games that haven't been, and certainly haven't been concentrated in a particular way. But one thing that you've said in, I think it was the EGX presentation that you gave a few years back, was that you like making games in genres that piss you off a little bit, and so turning our attention towards the stealth genre, such as it is, and what that genre has evolved into, and all of the different permutations it's been through, because these things have existed since 1979. I think was the first thing that I've managed to find that used a stealth mechanism, and of course since then we've had the 3D. The birth of 3D games, during which stealth did exceptionally well. 2D stealth became a massive thing around the late 2000s, early 2010s. So, in that wide spectrum of this weird little thing we call stealth games, where did you find your experiences?
What is exactly you don't like?
Yeah, I suppose that's the most direct question, but I was trying to find a nuanced way around it. But let's go ahead and ask that. Go on.
Well, I think. The problem is, the reason I said I like making games in genres that annoy me, or whatever it was, I like the idea of stealth games a lot of the time. I like the concept of avoiding conflict, because there's so much conflict in games that when you're presented with an option not to do it, I think that's really interesting. And I think my experience with stealth games, I was a PC gamer. Initially, I would say when I was a teenager growing up, it was mainly PC stuff, or certainly in my teens. And I sort of missed quite a lot of the early PlayStation, Xbox generation. But I felt that things had just gone really formulaic in the stealth genre, by which I mean it had become boiled down to crouching behind a baddie, walking towards him, hoping that the AI didn't turn around on a whim, and pressing a button, deciding to throttle him or kill him, and then moving on to the next one.
Yep.
And I felt like no matter the game, whether it was whether it was Splinter Cell, or whether it was Batman, or it was Assassin's Creed, or whether it was Deus Ex, or any of these things, there was basically these pinprick points of just high tension, hoping that the game doesn't fuck you over. Because it's not about, oh no, what happens if that guy catches me? It's about, oh no, what happens if the game catches me? And I never had that. I never got that disconnect out of my head. Is that when I'm approaching a guy, I don't want him to not turn around because, the mission will be blown, or I'll have to think on my feet and find some interesting way around it. I'm concerned because I'll have to go back to an earlier save point and try again. Right? It's got that sort of weird sense of dissonance, and I've never been able to get over that. And there's quite a lot of stuff that just never sits right with me. Every Deus Ex game I've played, it feels really designed. So you finally get into the mainframe room, and there's 6 guys walking on their patrol paths, and there's a way through them. There's like a dozen ways through them depending on what you've got, and it feels like you can feel the hand of the designers over every aspect of that room, and that feels really sort of inorganic and kind of boring to me. I don't mean boring because that's not the right word, but it just feels kind of almost uninspired, like that. There's no. I'm fighting against the designers. I'm not fighting against the game world, right? Which is what just sort of never sits right with me. And every Deus Ex game I've ever played, I've gone in through the vents. You go into a building and you go in through the vents, and you explore. And by the time you're done, everyone's dead, and you can then come out through the front door. And then find the roof access one and go in again. You know what I mean? And you just the whole thing becomes this weird playground where instead of being focused on this mission and on this one very specific task you've got, this high tension, high stakes task of not being discovered, not being found, is sort of completely pulled apart by the game aspect of it, where you then go, well, I've paid £50 for this content, I'm going to see every aspect of it.
Mm.
You know, if I paid £50 for a game, I want to know what's behind that vending machine. I want to know what the roof looks like. I'm not happy with the fact I've just been in an event, stolen the thing, and I've come back out the same event, and the level's taken. You know, do you know what I mean? This is. So
Yeah, completely. There's a similar thing. I've just gotten through a Dishonored playthrough because my next video is about Dishonored, and one mission in particular which sticks out when you describe your Deus Ex experience is Caldwin's Bridge, where you have to go and grab a target, and he's at the top of his mansion, and there is a way you can literally blink, you can teleport from the rooftops to his apartment on top of his mansion. But his mansion is this amazing, intricately detailed level that in unto itself. It's got guards, it's got maids and house servants cleaning everything. It's got all these inventions and kit lying around. So you have this kind of narrative being developed of who this guy is and what occupies his time, and just it's fascinating to kind of go through that mansion and infiltrate it. But every time I play that level, I am just too tempted by the easy option of just zipping over and grabbing the guy.
What's the impetus to going the long way around, right? When the impetus isn't for mission reasons. The impetus is for game design and system reasons. For like you're pulled out of that world that you're in, and you see the systems, and you see the designers, and you see the artists working away, and you're thinking,
sure,
well, I want to see what's going on here, rather than you know, oh shit, we got 4 minutes to get in and get out and get this play. How are we going to do it? You know, and staying within the narrative and staying within that little world you've built up and you're invested.
Yeah, it's interesting that we're talking about Deus Ex and Dishonored, because I mean these come under the general heading of immersive stealth, or the immersive sim, where you're supposed to feel completely part of this world, and yet the mechanisms by which we are intended to get invested and immersed in this thing are kind of the thing that are annoying you.
And this is obviously pie in the sky nonsense idea, but like, you know, a Deus Ex level where you've got to break into a bank, and the bank, there's no reloading it, and the bank reacts appropriately to finding an intruder. So you can walk in through the front door and get access to as much as, you know, and maybe you can hack a camera and go into a different. But the longer the level is like that, the harder it becomes to. The greater the tension becomes for the player, but the more annoying it becomes when you get caught and it all goes wrong. So it becomes about building a system that can cope with you getting it wrong, but also doesn't pull you out of the narrative and have a bank go, well, there was a guy here trying to break into a safe 3 minutes ago, but we reckon he's gone now. Reset your systems, everyone. At which point you just go, I sort of feel like I've cheated the system again here. This is like, there's no easy way around any of this. Which is, you know, and all these things is how, all this stuff is how the Swindle came about in a lot of ways, because it was my response to all these things I found frustrating. Like, how do you have these high tension moments but not have it a complete nightmare when you fail? How do you keep the stakes up? All this stuff, all these little systems designed to basically you're never crouching behind a guard, worried about him turning around.
Yeah, you're kind of battling with the quick save. It feels like there, because the quick save has kind of been a staple of getting through difficult stealth games for a lengthy period of time. The thing is, having this kind of perfection built into the idea of stealth, I think is diving into the Swindle and how that evolved. I think it's one of the reasons the Swindle either worked with some people who really like stealth games, or it just completely it kind of went one way or another, and I'm sure there were plenty of people in between who just thought, yeah, it's a fun game.
You know what, I do remember specifically saying to myself, I was playing the very first prototype of Swindle, and thinking to myself, man, some people are going to hate this. And if I was a better game developer, I probably would have gone, well, okay, how do we work on that and make more people like it? But I didn't. I just went, do you know what? This isn't going to be for everyone. This is what I want to play in a stealth game, and I bet this is what I'm banking on the fact that this is what a few thousand more people would like from a stealth game. But it's not to everyone's taste, and that's fine. The internet is a grown-up place of civilized people, isn't it? and then it launches, and you go, "Oh no, actually, I probably should have worked on that a little bit harder, a little bit more." But but they.
Well, yes and no, because this is kind of one of the things I was interested in hearing, because when people set out to make their game. One of the common threads I've picked up on when I've done interviews before is, we started trying to make something that everyone would like, and then we realised that not everyone would like it, and we thought, well, forget it, we'll just make the thing that we like, and other people will like that, and that will be fine. And very much with stealth-based games. I mean, if you just look at the catalogue of games that are out there, and the way that people react to them, there are people to this day who refuse to accept the idea that Assassin's Creed is a stealth game, and they refuse to accept the idea that the Batman Arkham games are stealth games because they have combat systems in them that are worth a damn.
Yeah.
And this is where we sort of get into the idea of different systems that you implement and how you implement them and how you balance these things. And I, in one level, I can completely understand where they're coming from, in that they're talking about a game that's been designed to accommodate when you screw up and get detected, and then you have to fight all of the bad guys who are coming for you.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I feel like that's quite a limiting range of criteria to stick your genre in and say, no, there can be no combat, and if you get detected, then that's it. It's all over, and you have to start again. So when you were approaching the Swindle initially, and we had this very brief conversation by email, because I was asking about this at the time I made my video on the Swindle. When you were making it initially, it gave me what you described as the AI build and how things worked. You had different gauges that filled up, and you had different guards' personalities, and you had handcrafted levels. How did you begin when you looked at stealth, and then you looked at what you wanted to do? How did you begin in taking the mechanisms that you liked about stealth, and how did that eventually all shake out into what the Swindle became?
I don't remember. It was a long time ago. The thing is, it's not like it's not a series of eureka moments. I don't think. I think it's like a day in, day out. Things change over time, and things work and things don't work. When the game was.
Well, let me make the question easier. What were some of the things that you started out with? The very first working build. What was that build of the Swindle like?
And what stuff carried over? You mean? What stuff did I not do?
Well, not necessarily what stuff carried over, but what was that initial build of the Swindle like? Because what we've got now is this procedurally generated level design, AI that is binary. So it's a binary stealth system. The typical stealth game, let's call it that, the typical stealth game, will have passive states of awareness, suspicious states of awareness, and active states of awareness. So, I'm just patrolling around. I've noticed something. I'm going to go and have a look. There's an enemy. I'm going to go and chase them down.
It was much more like that. It was much more. I'll tell you what it was. It was what I thought a stealth game. I'm making a stealth game. This is what a stealth game should be. These are the things that stealth games have in it. Therefore, I'm putting them in. So, AI that would identify that there's a dead body on the floor and go and look for an assailant, and then after a minute give up and think, it had states of play for the different guards. So the guards, the one build, and it didn't, it was hardly implemented. It was implemented on paper, but it was barely in the game. But I could tell from the first implementation it wasn't going to work, because the guards all had different personalities and shifts and stuff. So if you if you went into a building, it had a full day-night cycle, and you could decide what time of day you went into the building. And if you hit it at sort of dawn when the guard was on his shift, he'd be slightly lazier, slightly slower to get up and investigate things from his chair and all this sort of stuff. And it was one of these things that you lie in bed awake at night thinking, oh, that's going to be amazing. Like really sort of immersive sim stuff, that like they're sort of sitting in the rafters waiting for a guard who's from the file has just had a baby, so he's really tired, so he's going to fall asleep really quickly. Like these little things that that was the idea that you'd pick up on. Although that guard's just had a baby, so I know he's going to fall asleep on the job. That kind of still kind of binary, but you'd have to read it and you'd have to look into it. So those kind of systems, and it just didn't work at all. It's just like it was just there was no way to convey that information in a enjoyable way to the player. So like you can't have like a little timer above a guard's head saying time until sleep 1 minute 36. That's no fun either. So it became this sort of game of really boring systems that didn't really impact the core gameplay.
Yeah, it was very complex, and you had to figure out a way of refining it.
Yeah, it was. I don't think it was a case of refining it. I think it was a case of gutting it and starting over.
Yeah, that was a polite way of saying gutting it and starting it over.
But these are the things that every game that I've ever made, and I'm willing to wager every game that has ever been made in the history of ever has these things. You just don't hear about them very often. You won't hear about, when we're talking about Arkham Asylum's failed combat systems that were ropey as hell. You just sort of, the ideas that didn't work, and they've got implemented one Thursday afternoon in an hour flat, and everyone just went, that's not going to work. You just because people forget about it, and nobody, it's just part of the job. And when you're working all day every day on stuff, all these systems that you try and don't work, and you put them in, and in a really sort of rough way, and after a while you start to get a good sense for whether or not something's going to work pretty quick. And this is why reviewers, reviews don't tend to do this, but like people who aren't professional reviewers, leaving comments and all that sort of stuff. If you ever see a comment that starts with "it would be better if," right? You can safely ignore that, because I will guarantee you 9 times out of 10 the developer tried that and it wasn't better. It was worse. It was much worse, right? And so like it's the easiest thing in the world to just look at a game and go, oh, it'd be so much better if XYZ. And they've tried it and it wasn't better. You're not the first person to come up with this idea over the course of like a 3-year development cycle of an average video game or whatever. You're not the first person that's had this idea, and then you just go, oh yeah, we're not going to, if it's a good idea, they'll try it, and they'll fail, and they'll go no. So the Swindle was basically a long period of development across various different versions, because there's an XNA version, and then there was a Unity version, the hand-built Unity version, of just, I don't want to say bad ideas, but ideas that didn't work. Ideas that weren't, either didn't work or weren't the game I wanted to make. Yeah, and I think one of the things, because you mentioned perfection earlier about the stealth genre and perfection. I think that's
it's sort of leans towards that.
It does,
field.
and I think that's one of the things in the great long list of things I don't like about stealth games that I don't want to say annoys me, but that's the same Deus Ex thing about going in through the vents and coming out through the front door and then going back in again. That sort of desire for perfection is one of the things that sort of grinds my gears about it. Is it feels so wrong. It feels so weird. And so one of the things that I did with the Swindle was that you have to get your head around the fact that you're not going to be able to steal all the money from a level. And I did that deliberately, and I put in computers at the start, but before you can hack computers for the big cache, I put them into the levels as like a tutorial to basically have people say, and there are rooms that are cut off, that you can't access, as a sort of organic tutorial, as if to say to the player, think about that room and how you would get in there, and then when you're back at the shop and you can upgrade your character, about what sort of things are important to you. Whether you want to get bombs to get through that wall, whether you want to learn to hack to get through the door to get into that wall, like all these things that were organic tutorials. And it really, the people who need perfection in their lives or in stealth games, it really rubbed them up the wrong way, because they were like, no one said, oh, that's bad design, I don't like that. They all said the game is buggy. Like, all of the reviews say that the game is buggy because it creates rooms you can't access, and not one of them realised that those rooms are there to lead you through the game, especially in those early stages, to lead you through and make you think about the spaces that you're in and how you're going to use your tools, and give you an impetus to buy those things. Right? It's like, why would you buy bombs if you haven't come across an opportunity where you needed bombs to go anywhere, right? So
yeah, indeed, and there are as you go on through the Swindle, you get these increasingly hostile spaces with enemies in there, and you just think, there is no way that I'm going to make it past all of those. And then you see, but as you buy more gear, as you experiment with some of the systems, you find that you think, well, I can get in there technically, but is it worth getting in there? And then there's this whole idea of, you develop strategies, you develop ideas as to how you can play the system and how the system can respond to you. And that was one of the things about the Swindle that I found quite charming. And it was it's a constant surprise to me that people looked at that and said, well, why would you ever try and get into that room? Because you've got 10,000 enemies in there, and there's a computer that you can clearly hack, and that must be a mistake.
Exactly. But it's the fact that they think it's buggy is, a source of amusement, but annoying as well. I think it's one of those things that, like, if I had my time again, I'd signpost it a lot better. I'd probably put up a splash screen at the start of the game. I think it does actually say at some point in the tutorial, maybe I took it out, you can't get everywhere. Don't try and get everywhere. You can get stuck, right? And I worked for ages. The code for not getting stuck is in, and it works. It won't generate a level you can't get out of. But it was boring as hell because there's no tension in it, right? If you know you can get, if you look at a shaft and look at a lift shaft going downwards, and you look at it and go, well, I must be able to get out of that because otherwise it wouldn't be there. Is really boring to me. Having you look at a shaft and go, do I jump down this because I might not be able to get out again, is amazing. Right? I really love that as a gameplay thing, as a thing that you're making.
Feels like we're in Spelunky territory there.
Yeah, like as a thing you're making players feel and think is like free, like emotional attachment, for free. I don't want to say content, that's rubbish, but you know what I mean. That's free gameplay that I'm not going to code and take that out and make it worse. But the people who don't like that stuff really don't like that stuff, and it's upsetting, and it's a shame. But you've just got to live with it and deal with the fact that they'll leave a negative Steam review and walk away, and you just go, well, that wasn't for you.
Well, sure. I mean, there's always going to be that factor whenever people are building their own stealth game. There are going to be people who think, well, this system's rubbish, and but what I think is interesting about the Swindle in particular is that I thought, well, if someone plays it and they don't like it now, maybe they'll come back to it in a couple of years' time when they've experienced some other things and realised, oh yeah, well, other genre games can be done this way, and a God of War game can be a narrative game, and you can have strong narrative design in tandem with action, and you can have a really fantastic first-person shooter in the shape of Doom that doesn't rely on you listening to cutscenes or watching story or whatever. And they might think, well, maybe I'll give this thing a try again and see if I like it. And maybe they will like it again, because the Swindle feels to me like something which, and this is, I think, is more or less what I covered in the Stealth Game Changer episode. It's something that asks you to think differently about stealth games in particular. To let go of this preconception that when enemies see a body, they're going to freak out and set off alarms and do whatever. That enemy behaviour is predictable. It can be predictable and believably predictable because you're dealing with a bunch of robot guards.
Yeah,
and that's going to quite nicely lead into something else I wanted to address, which was, my God, the enemy variety in this game. I still can't remember every single thing. Like, when I play through this thing again, and I've tried to go through this for the Spring-Heeled Jack achievement a couple of times. For those,
I don't think I've got that. I don't think I've got that yet, so don't worry.
No, I think you. I remember asking you about this a couple of years ago, and you said, "Yeah, you've done it to make sure that it was achievable." So I'm sure you must have. But the Spring-Heeled Jack achievement is...
I bet I cheated that.
Maybe you did. But the achievement is for finishing the Swindle, you don't die once. And you're able to sort of go from beginning to end and not die once. If you've played the Swindle, you'll know that that's bloody difficult. For a start, because everything is randomly generated. Secondly, because you have to really know how the enemies react and how they behave. And I just want to talk to you a little bit, drill down a little bit into that aspect of the design. So once you had, procedural level generation, and you have all these different environments or whatever, how do you then populate that with enemies that scale up appropriately? And certainly there were some enemies that were, I want to say, a bit more random than others, in the sense that you could set off one of these, these horrible things that were like the old Victorian, the Victrolas, that you could set off by being noisy, by running around on everything, running around on the rooftop. I remember is what was commonly the thing they reacted to, and they would spit out these little drones, and the drones would always home in on you. They would always home in on where you were roughly. So you have all these different enemy behaviors and enemy designs. Where did you start? How did that grow and evolve? And how do you know when enough is enough or too much is too much when you're sort of designing those things, when you're coming up with those concepts?
I think it came about just because, I don't think it was the original plan, because it was just, the idea wasn't to have loads of variety in them, and to be fair, there's not a lot of variety. There's basically bipeds or flying ones or noise detectors, and there's some wall ones, and I think that's about it. And I think the idea originally was to have it more basic guards that would upgrade over the course of the game. So the first guard that you get that just walks left and right and then clobbers you if they see you, and the idea was they'd get more and more swanky as you go through, and then there's a heavier reliance on environmental hazards. But the environmental hazards made more sense once the alarms had been triggered, because it felt really weird having a warehouse, for example, with all laser traps all over it and things. So it made more sense to take those out and it made the alarm kicking and getting spotted way more interesting. If things started to come down around you, literally and metaphorically, once you'd been detected. So with that meant that it needed some more standard guard patrol enemies. And honestly, I would have put in more if Michael Furman, who did the art, if I wasn't burning him out already like demanding art assets. It was he. I mean, he was amazing at that stuff.
Yeah, that's it goes to show, because you say there weren't really that many differing. There might not have been that many differing basic behavior patterns, but in terms of visuals, there's a huge difference. There's a huge amount of variety.
I would say to him, and they're all sharing animations. I think, yeah, they're all sharing animations, and they're all, some of them are, not all of them are, but some of them share animations, and they share, 95% of their code, and then there was a couple of tweaks just to make them fire different types of gun, or how they would move and behave and react and all that sort of thing. And it really was that I would say to Michael, I think I've come up with, here's a list of half a dozen different biped types, and they're, I've come up with some interesting ways for them to do attacks. Do you think you could sling some designs at me? And I think the key part of it was that basically Michael, I suspect, loved doing that stuff. That's where his heart lies, is in that character art side of things, more than the environments and the, if I said to Michael, can I have 8 new types of wallpaper, please? It'd take him forever, because he's just like, oh god, wallpaper. But if I said to him, can I have 8 new types of enemies, please? They'd be there the next day. Right? And as far as I was concerned, it got to the point where because I had to limit the scope of the game somehow. I would have loved to have like 30 different environments, but it was never going to happen. And if I did a sequel, I think I would probably push for more environments and less enemy types. We'll see. I don't really know. But so we had these five unique, visually unique environments that sort of progressed through the social spectrum, from the poorest to the poor to the richest to the rich. And it obviously felt very weird having these clunky rubbish robots clunking around a bank or a mansion or something. So there needed to be a sort of visual redesign of stuff. So I just send them to Michael, and the more I put in, it was a case of, it changed the game so much and in so many interesting ways, that you could be on your 8th run at a mansion level and still not have seen half a dozen enemy types that the mansion could throw at you, right? So you could, if you started the mansion and it's okay, here's a new background, and here's the 4 types of enemy that you're going to come across in mansions, I think that's quite boring. If it's like, here's a new enemy, here's a new mansion environment, and even after playing around with it for an hour, you're still discovering new enemy types and how to deal with them, keeps the player on their toes and keeps things interesting. Like, you've got a massive hall and you suddenly find a new enemy and you don't know what they do. You don't know what their attack is, and you don't know. And like, several times, I watch people play it and they just go, nope, I'm leaving, because that was always the draw to me of the Swindle, is the ability to leave at any point with what you've got. That was always the thing that I loved the most. And whenever people complain about it being too hard, I'm like, that's not the game. That's you, man. That's you. That's you. You're making it hard with your greed. It's actually a super easy game if you just know when to call it quits. If you just go, I've got enough here, I'll walk away. And it takes you about 40 days to complete the game. It's not that hard. But what's hard is that people just can't walk away, because you just go, oh, one more little score. And I've seen people come across a new enemy type. There's one which is really harsh, and I do feel for people who get caught by it. But there's a flying drone one where it just zaps you if you walk underneath it. It's really horrible and unfair.
Strangely enough, I've never been caught out by that one.
Oh, that's good. You're so wary of it the first time you saw it.
I was really paranoid about that, because as soon as I saw it, I thought, okay, what do you do? And then that jolt of electricity shot to the floor. I was like, okay.
I think it does jolt electricity down. I think I made it jolt electricity down like sometimes. even though there's nothing there. But
Yeah, I've never been killed by it, so I don't know what it does to you, and I've never wanted to find out because I've just been too busy trying to keep my multiplier.
The point is, I watched someone play the Swindle because you obviously watch people play over and over again before you release the game, and it's one of the times I remember distinctly feeling like the Swindle was something a bit special was when someone was doing really well in a level and got zapped by one of those things. I mean, no idea what it was, and they burst out laughing with the heartiest laugh as all this money went flying everywhere, and I thought, like, that's the right attitude to have. Is you just go, do you know what? Try again. I know what that does now, and I'll try and store that in my memory. That's fine. It was just one of those things that I just think that's really lovely. And obviously people hate that, right? They just go, "Oh my God, that's so unfair. That's really how was I supposed to know? How was I supposed to know that?" And so, well, you're supposed to know that by playing the game and getting it wrong. That's fine to go.
Yeah, you totally tapped into that mentality that people have, because this, and I hate to bring up this bloody thing because it always gets brought up with every piece of analysis, but the same attitude. You find it in people who are playing through Dark Souls games.
Yeah.
For the first time. So the only way to understand that there are treasure chests that can kill you, short of seeing them as a meme somewhere, is to get caught by one and for it to kill you. And then you're like, oh, okay, so that's a thing. And I need to be careful about that. And yeah, the Swindle taps into that same thing, that same air of like, oh, what the hell is that? How does that work? Oh, and I'm dead. Okay, so I'll know not to do that next time. And that was definitely, for me, that was one of the things about the Swindle that I loved, going through and discovering what new contraptions awaited me to make my life into a living hell. And this, in particular, I remember for the first time coming across this thing that rolls around in a cube, and I was just watching this thing for a good 5 minutes trying to understand where does it stop, how does it move,
because there's nothing else like it, right? It's just this one-off enemy.
No.
You don't see anything else do that, and I've watched people come across that and they just go, what? And it's terrifying it's terrifying in this really creepy way. It's like it's unstoppable and you can't hit it and you can't do anything with it, but like
you can blow it up, but then it will blow up everything around it, and so you have to be a bit.
Because that's the other thing, is when people finally take one down, and then it destroys the computer that they were after.
Yep, that's happened to me on more than a couple of occasions. Oh, so I want to get off a couple of questions for people who sponsor my work on Patreon. Thank you very much, and for some of the people who got in touch via Twitter. So the chap who got in touch with me over Patreon has got a fairly lengthy bit that I avoided diving into earlier because we touched on it. But he wants to know what your thoughts are on the information gathering aspect of stealth games, and he brings up the first and third person perspectives and how you can kind of abuse third person perspectives.
Oh, I see.
You can use special X-ray, infrared, night vision. You can use wall hacks to see through walls and see enemies. And he said there are some really clever ones like the scouting orb in Thief 2, which while you're looking through, you can be caught by something else because you're not in your body, as it were. You're just looking through this device. And he said that it was really fun to peek through keyholes in Dishonored, because you're vulnerable to whatever's in your immediate vicinity. But then you get void gaze and you just switch that on, and why would you bother looking through keyholes again? Because that's just taken away the need to look through a keyhole because you can see everyone. So he's wondering, is information gathering something that is a necessary evil of stealth games, or is it an essential component of the fun of stealth games, and how do you determine that balance?
Do you know what? I think they're all things that are, well, by and large, they're all things that are there to solve a video game problem, and therefore, like I said earlier, are things that pull me out of the game. Detective vision and see-through wall vision, or Sam Fisher's last known location ghost and all that sort of stuff. Is they all serve a. They're all solutions to a game design problem. So they've sat there and gone, well, it's annoying for the player to not know where guards are looking, so we'll leave a little silhouette of where they were spotted, so that they know. And I tend to find them as like systems of, what's the way of putting it? I tend to find that they are difficult. They're really elegant, beautiful solutions that I hate. I think that's. I can't express it cleanly enough. Sorry, I'm. It's like 40. It's 40 degrees in my office. I'm not.
No. I think I know what you're getting at. I think what you're saying is certain information gathering things are kind of boring answers to the question of how can you avoid
But they're
detection.
all like, in a lot of ways, the Swindle has tools. They're all tools, aren't they? But of course. And the Swindle has tools that you can buy or not buy to get. The idea of Swindle was that you would not buy everything. I think people don't play it like that. I think people buy everything and then progress. But I think because the time limit on the Swindle was kind of an idea to focus that sort of, well, I've got to move on to the next environment, and I've got to move on to the next environment, and to prioritize moving on to bigger environments over just upgrading your character. But and which was just this impossible balancing act that how much you make stuff cost was just it was all over the place until the last weeks before release. But I think all these things, they solve problems, and they're there to solve problems. But I don't necessarily feel like that's what I want in a stealth game.
No, I mean this is something interesting that happened in Dishonored because in the first two games they've got a power that lets you just see through walls, and that's it. You see through walls, you see everything.
Yeah.
In the last one they released, Death of the Outsider, they changed it to this astral scouting type thing that you do. So you activate this thing and you go into this room as a spectral spirit. You can't be seen, but you can't interact with anything.
Right.
But what you can do is mark loot, you can mark enemies, you can mark things, but you only have a limited amount of time to do it, and you only have a limited amount of marks to use.
Right,
and that, to me, seemed like a much better answer.
Yeah, that seems much smarter.
To the idea of information gathering than pretty much anything, almost, I've seen in 3D stealth games, short of the scouting orb, which I quite liked as well from the Thief 2 games, but then it seemed a bit odd to me that enemies never noticed this strange spherical object on the floor.
Do you know the one that always sticks out in my mind was Last of Us, which is a sort of beautiful. I really enjoyed the story of Last of Us, and I'm aware it's not the most realistic story because it has zombies in it. But let's go with the fact that it could have done without. It didn't need the zombies in The Last of Us in a lot of ways. I sort of felt like they were a necessary evil. But Joel, who is just this normal bloke, has the ability to hear silhouettes through the wall if he's quiet. And it was just one of those things where I was just like, this makes no sense. And it's like, on the one hand, I mean, quite a lot of that game doesn't make sense. So let's be fair to it. It's a game, right? So it's not going to make any sense. But that aspect of it specifically annoyed me in a lot of ways because I was just like, I don't feel like this is a sort of
a cop out.
Well, but it's a cop out, but it's a cop out in a game that didn't. The rest of the game didn't lend itself to the fact that he's got Spider-Man powers.
Yeah, he has that sort of sense mode. I'm sure there's lots more to say about The Last of Us and its stealth, which I will get into at some point. But so a couple of questions came back from Twitter. They're a bit easier than the last one, talking about all these information systems and whether or not they're a good or bad things. Hopefully, yes. So this is from Scott John Harrison, and he says that, and he's obviously been following you for a while because he knows your earlier work was a bit more silly, a bit more on the humorous side, and he noticed that the Swindle had kind of less of that obvious politically incorrect and fun humour that was going through it, and he's just wondering, were there any in-jokes or references that you decided to hide in the Swindle, because it was one of your more serious games? Could you resist putting in some in-jokes or references?
Do you know what? All of my games since Time Gentlemen Please have had. There's a bomb in the background of one of the levels in Time Gentlemen Please, which I think, well, I could be wrong. I think it's just a red herring. I don't think you ever actually have to do anything with it. I think it's just sitting in the background. A sort of unexploded bomb, and that's been in all my games since.
The ultimate point and click troll, put a bomb in the background.
Yeah, exactly. So that was in Gun Monkeys, and it was in the Swindle, and it was in Kickman. And I think I think it's on the last level. If you're on the police station right at the end, it's in the basement somewhere. It can generate a level with a unexploded bomb in it. But like the first versions of the Swindle had a story. It had a much more serious story, but a story much less irreverent, I would say, is my writing style. But like a lot less irreverent, but it told a story, and it just didn't work, and it just took it all out. And it's got these little bits of paragraph of blurb just for each area, each new area you can access, which are my most serious writing, but it's a little bit silly. But like, I think the thing about the Swindle was it has the Swindle sense of humor was much more in the gameplay, and I felt like because the original stuff that I'd written for the Swindle was my usual irreverent writing style, and I sort of felt like that isn't as good as when things go wrong in the game and it's funny. The comedy in the game comes from the pratfalls and the mishaps and the things going wrong and the bombs going off and things, chain explosions.
You laugh at yourself when you make a mistake.
That stuff, that natural organic humor, I think, out trying to underpin that with silly jokes didn't work. So the setup needed to be much more straight man for the full comedy of the actual gameplay. There you go. That sounds that.
On a side note, I have taken to jumping up on the rooftops of certain buildings in the Swindle so that I can read the signs that that they have all the different warehouses and things, and you can. They're kind of amusing in and of themselves.
They're all procedurally generated as well, so they're all they're not they're sort of cobbled together, procedurally generated. So it can actually put together some really weird ones, and all the names as well. I think some of the names. I think it is possible to have a character spawn. It's technically possible to have a thief called Ben There Dan That, or something like that. So but it's really, really, really unlikely. So I don't know. Yeah. Actually, and you can get a character called Tim Gentleman Peas as well. I'd forgotten about that. You can get a Tim Gentleman Peas, but again, very unlikely.
Oh, that's perfect. I'm going to be playing through this again so that I can get footage for this interview, and I'm going to hope that I just spawn with that. Although that being said, I'm going to try and go for that achievement. So hopefully I won't die, but if I do, then maybe I'll get one of those. So last couple of questions from Hemang Shuhan. I hope I'm pronouncing that name correctly. I'm so sorry if I'm not. He's asked two questions. First of all, what are the craziest stealth game ideas you've had generally, or when you started working on the Swindle? We kind of covered that a little bit, but even so, if there are any that spring to mind, what springs to mind about some of the weirdest ideas you had that you thought,
I can't think of anything. I tend to be. My natural approach is very conservative in terms of those things. I tend to be quite straight-laced, and I put things in quite straight-laced, and then I look at it one day and go, that's not out there enough for me. How do I make that more? How do I make that stupider? So quite a lot of the stuff is unfortunately technically boring goes in first. Technically boring but fun goes in first, and then gets zanied up. Sorry.
No. It makes complete sense. The final question, which we've kind of also covered already, but I'll ask it, is he's wondering what your thoughts are on popular 3D stealth games from a 2D stealth game developer's perspective. So, I think that we've already covered some of the stuff that Splinter Cell and Deus Ex. But how did you feel about the Thief games if you played those? How did you feel about How do you feel about Metal Gear Solid and the Metal Gear Solid series?
I've never played a Thief game, and I've never played a Metal Gear Solid game. I looked at.
Wow.
I considered, what was the one that was before 5 came out, where it was like a building.
That was Ground Zeroes.
Ground Zeroes. I looked at that and I considered that. Do you know what?
Everyone went mad because it was just literally one level.
Yeah, that's right. But you replay it, don't you? It's like a...
Yeah.
And I looked at Metal Gear Solid 5, and honestly, Metal Gear Solid 5, just every bit of gameplay I looked at. Because every once in a while you go, do you know what? I think I might try Metal Gear Solid 5. And then every bit of gameplay I watched just embodied everything I hate about stealth games.
Wow!
And
this is a brave thing to say on a stealth gaming channel.
Crawling through the desert, attaching things to balloons, and getting caught, and trying not to get caught. And it was just, every time I looked at it, I just go, I can't be bothered with it. It's just got that immediate. Do you know what? I'm not going to like that. I think I played some of. I played the demo of 4. That's right. Played the demo of 4, and
Guns of the Patriots, if I recall.
Yeah, I found it just impenetrably obtuse in a lot of ways. Like I didn't understand what was going on, and I didn't understand most of the systems, and I got a bit confused and disheartened by it. But
it feels kind of like Metal Gear is a genre unto itself almost. Because I think of stealth games, and in my mind, Metal Gear Solid and the Metal Gear games in general kind of separated from the stealth genre some time ago, because they are just so weird and interesting in their own sweet way.
I'm unpleasant and dismissive towards quite a lot of this stuff, but only because I want to see it be better. You can be upset, you can be dismissive of quite a lot of things and still really enjoy them.
Oh yeah, totally. No. Be critical of what you love. I mean, there's not going to be anyone who likes every popular game out there. Probably needs to be examined, because there must be something wrong with them. There's this perception that because so many other people love it, we have to love it as well. And as we've demonstrated, as the Swindle itself demonstrates, it's every game contains a series of ideas. Some of those ideas will resonate with you when you play them. And if you can latch onto more stuff that you love than stuff that you think, then you've succeeded. That's a success.
Did you play the what was that called? Horizon Zero Dawn. Did you play that one?
I haven't yet, no, because it was a PlayStation exclusive, I think.
So it's an open world thing, and this sort of typifies my attitude to. I loved that game. I really enjoyed it. I had a great time with it because the combat was so good and it always felt epic and exciting. And it's got some good stealthy sort of stuff in it as well, which is nice.
Oh, I'll have to play it.
Only stealth insofar as like trying not to get spotted by a robot. But simple stuff, but enjoyable. It's clean, right? And it falls into all these open world trappings, or the standard GTA mission structure that leads you around the world. And basically there are these things called cauldrons in that game that fill out the backstory of what's happened and why there are robots roaming around the world and why everyone's in tribes and firing arrows now. And they're amazing. It's really exciting finding one of these cauldrons, and then you press a button and you basically see a cutscene explaining a section of the past, before the world went to shit. And they were the best bits about it. And I just looked at it and I thought, you know what? If you just took out all the missions out of this game, like all of the sort of dead-eyed NPCs giving you instructions to go on another fetch quest or whatever. This game doesn't need any of that. If you just had this open world and then these 5 cauldrons in various different places and just let the player go and explore and find them, I'd be much happier with that. And Metal Gear Solid sort of feels like the same to me, in that I look at it and I just think, do you know what? The actual minute by minute gameplay, I like the look of. But every bit I see where there's a great long cutscene and, you know, he's storming through a building or crouching outside a building, waiting for a man to stop having a cigarette or whatever, I just go, oh, I can't be bothered starting that up. But there you go.
I can relate to that totally. There is a point I get with when I'm replaying through certain titles, and I think, do you know what? I'd rather play this than watch it at the moment.
Yeah.
But yeah, I totally understand where we're coming from. Anyway, I think that we'll wrap it up there because we're approaching the 12 o'clock mark.
I've got to open a window in my. I've had the window closed because I didn't want a tractor to go past and ruin everything. But it's yeah, it must be like 40 degrees up here now. We're in the middle of a heat wave. For context, we're in the middle of a heat wave, and my office is really poorly insulated. So
yeah, it's the same. It's the same in London. It's ridiculous. Well, thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to have a chat with me about a game that you released 3 years ago, which you probably know. Just for the masses who are watching, can you tell us anything about what you're working on at the present time, or is it still?
It's still under wraps. It's I'm really hoping to announce it soon, because it's had a working title for a couple of years now that I didn't like, and so I've been holding off talking to people about what I'm making because of how much I hated the title, and just come up with a much better title. So I'm feeling much happier about starting to talk about it soon, but it's not quite there yet. It's
all right. No worries.
It's still very much in development.
Okay, so I mean, as a finishing question, I'll just ask: is it likely that you're going to return to the Swindle for a sequel?
Yeah,
maybe.
It's on my long-term list of things. I did start making a sequel, and decided. Well, I just had a kid, and I decided I was too tired all the time to be making a procedural building generator, so I did something much easier instead. So
totally
now
understandable.
That I've caught up on sleep, I'm feeling much happier about putting those kinds of systems together. So we'll see. I'm quite. I have a really good idea for a Swindle sequel that I think will make all those people who didn't like the original a lot happier with it.
Just make sure you're happy with it.
Well, no, yeah, I'm not going to make something that I don't like, but. Yeah, I do have a really good idea, and I you know, if you go on Size 5 Games, there was actually a guy called Gareth Davies put together some concept art for my first sort of, because I was going to do a sort of futuristic version of the Swindle and like completely take it out of that steampunk world and put it somewhere else, and I still don't know where I put it, but I think, you know, I've got a really nice mechanic around that keeps the core of what the Swindle is, but makes it a lot more accessible for people and a lot more interesting, like not minute by minute, but like hour by hour gameplay instead of. So we'll see. I'm really keen to do it. I really hope it can happen.
I think more than a few of us are looking forward to seeing it, because it was such a breath of fresh air for some of us who were so tired of the quick save routine. Not that that's a bad thing, but you know, it's nice to have a bit of variety.
I get it.
Anyway, thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Cheers.